Morning, everybody. Nice to see everybody this morning. This is the Red Crown session. Very excited to talk about Red Crown today. This is an organic red tea. And for those of you who are new, and I welcome the two of you who are new today, that would be Michelle and Cassandra. When we say red, that's usually what in the West is referred to as black tea. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Before we start out with that, let's talk about Quality Arena. We've been talking about Quality Arena as a standard that we use to make evaluations about tea. And we've been talking about this now for a bit, 3 or 4 months. This came in handy this week because we had a customer who's been on many of these sessions, and he wrote me an excited email. He said, I just had this wonderful Cliff tea, and it is, and he named a varietal from the Wuyi Mountains. And do you carry this? Well, the name of the tea is Wild Flowers. It doesn't matter what the varietal is, and that's why we don't use varietal names, because that's useless. The name of the tea itself is useless. So I wrote back to him and I said, tell me, enter the Quality Arena with me and give me a description of the tea. 10 minutes later, I had this very good description of the tea, and I was able to right away identify 2 or 3 teas that might be to his liking and might be to an equivalent of what he had. The other thing that was funny was when he identified the varietal, he misidentified it, which he also corrected in the follow-up email. So again, those names, so things like Rogueway, Shuixian, they're useless because that's like saying, I want a good cab. Okay. A good cab to me might not be a good cab to you. But if you tell me I want it with hints of fruit, I want less tannin, I want a little hint of chocolate if that's available, okay, you've given me stuff I can work with. That's not stuff you've given me. You've given me descriptions I can work with, and that's great. So that's why we focus on the Quality Arena, and that's why we'll continue to focus on that and develop the Quality Arena. What kind of a week business-wise has it been for us? Complicated. The war in Europe complicates things greatly. Tea prices, you're going to find, are all over the place. And part of it is nobody can move tea. So here's what's happened. The Russians consume per person about 3 pounds per tea. Oh, but there's sanctions now, which means tea can't hardly move anywhere. So that's making the tea market already very unbalanced. That's one thing. The other thing is the Japanese tea market has, in effect, collapsed. I use that term advisedly. What I mean by collapse is nobody's picking right now because it isn't deemed safe to do so right now. And that's an Omicron situation. So there's lots of things that are going to be very difficult to navigate this year. Add on the entire geopolitical situation, and it's very complicated. Right now, China and the US aren't playing nice. We don't know how this is going to affect. And what I would advise you to be aware of is if you have stuff you like, you better stock up on that a little bit, because who knows what future supply is going to look like. We today, as you talk to me, continue to have access. And we've worked really, really hard over many, many years to develop these strong relationships in China. What we cannot predict is, again, what everybody's behavior at a government level is going to be and how that could affect the future. What I will tell you is that our plan this year is to buy big, real big, as big as we can afford, to stock up just in case there's an interruption in supply. All right, so that gives you a little bit about some of the things we've been thinking about this week, and particularly this sensibility about why it is so important to understand quality arena and talk using quality arena instead of trying to identify specific names, because again, the specific names have no relevance to getting you to what you really want. And that's really important to understand. Red crown, a red tea. Red crown comes from Yunnan Province. Yunnan is in southwest China. It borders Burma, Laos, Cambodia, Vietnam. And the location of where red crown comes from is it's about 150 miles or 200 miles from the border with Burma. And that would be going north. And it's in an area called Lincang. And this area is very famous in the tea world in China. Some parts of it are very remote, almost impossible to get to some villages. Nonetheless, some of the most interesting tea from Yunnan comes out of this area. Fengqing is located within Lincang. Fengqing is the area where Dianhong, so I'm using a bunch of terms. So for those of you who are new today, don't worry, I'll get through and explain all of those. So Dianhong, D-I-A-N-H-O-N-G, is the term that's used in China to describe tea that comes from Yunnan Province. And it's a general descriptor, and it covers all red teas that come from Yunnan Province. But its origin was in Fengqing. So there's the explanation of why I use the term Fengqing, which is a physical location marker, and what Dianhong means, which is the common way that tea in China that comes from Yunnan Province is referred to. Here, there's confusion in the United States because you get some of the chains who say, yeah, I have Dianhong, and they present it as if there's only one Dianhong. That's obviously very false. There's hundreds of Dianhongs. So, red crown belongs generally to the Dianhong category, but it isn't from Fengqing. It's from Lincang, which isn't that far away. It's about a 4-hour drive through the mountains from Fengqing to where this area is. But what's special about where red crown is growing? There's lots of old and ancient trees. Let's redefine old again, or remind ourselves of what old means. It means over 100 years, less than 1,000 years. Ancient, over 1,000 years old. So this area has quite a few ancient trees and quite a number of old trees. This particular stand of old trees, the farmer responsible for this spent the money to get this certified organic. Now, as most of you know, old tree and ancient tree implies organically grown. because certainly with ancient tree, it's not terraced. So that's one important thing to remember. The other thing to remember, and this touches upon availability, it touches upon price. Ancient tree is usually farmed by indigenous peoples who live in those areas. They're almost all very remote areas. The transportation infrastructure, though getting better, is still not very good. And so access to the market sometimes is limited. But for those in the know in China, the high elevation, ancient tree material, source material, is what people will pay scads of money for. And hence the high price of that tea in general. All right, so let's talk about this particular area where Red Crown comes from. It's old and ancient tree, and the people who farm this are Bulang people. That's the name of the indigenous group that farms it. And their processing methodology is both using the red/black style, and I'll describe what that actually physically means, and then the true black, which is the fermented tea style. So the style for Red Crown is an oxidized style. And that means that the tea is heavily oxidized. So heavily oxidized mean anywhere from 92, 93, 94, 95% oxidized. So I think what we're going to do before we go much further is demonstrate, and again, for those of you who are new, what we do first is demonstrate how to brew the tea. And then we'll brew along with you. So the first time you watch, you catch the rhythm, we talk about the things you're looking for, and then the second time you do. So it is with great pleasure that I bring over the tea master to go ahead and demonstrate with you. Xiaobei.
Hi, good morning. 大家好，早上好 Yeah, good morning. Yeah. So we do 红茶 red tea. This tea from Yunnan also so it's people know Yunnan tea, when you go to China, everybody understand, they use a low temperature of the water, low up. So yeah, same of 5 grams. So
everything is pre-measured in your package. You're not opening it yet, but we always simulate everything here. So you don't have to measure that. So the first thing that Xiaobei does is to heat up the cups. Doesn't matter that your cups are pristine and clean. Our cups are always that way, but we still heat the cups up. We still put hot water. Hot water being defined as anything from 175 to 212. It does not matter the precise temperature that you put to heat up the cup, to put the water in to heat up the cup. And the reason that you're heating up the cup, there's several reasons. You're going to put tea leaves in there first and get them heated, and they'll start to release the aroma, and you'll start to get a sensibility of what this tea is going to be like. The second thing is, just in case there's a stray soap spot or something that doesn't belong on the cup, by heating them this way, you completely eliminate any possibility of anything going wrong with the flavor or aroma. So Xiaobei is drawing 175-degree water, and you'll notice one of the things she's going to do is actually aerate the water or dissipate the steam. Both things are going on, and we call this structuring the water. And you'll hear people use all sorts of different terms, and you'll hear people not use any terms at all. But that's what's going on here. And it's always fun to do this, so you can always use the term you're playing with the water too. But that doesn't really describe what you're trying to accomplish. So realistically, if the water gets down to 170 or 168, is that a problem? And the answer would be no. In fact, the 175 is kind of the ceiling of where the water should be. Why? If you start to edge it up above 175, what happens? What happens to the aroma? What happens to the flavor? It flattens. It's not as bright. All right, she's taken the leaves out of the bagging. And she's put them in the cup. And you notice she didn't handle them. No lotions, no perfumes. Shakes the cup, trying to make sure that all the leaves have an opportunity to get some heat. Smells it to get that first sensibility. Does one more round of dissipation, steam dissipation. Pours the water on the side. And then sets the timer.
Could you please say again what the name of the indigenous people?
Bulang, B-U-L-A-N-G. So we set this for 3 minutes. And you make sure that there's water in the receptacle cup, hot water in the receptacle cup. So this is a beautiful tea, both on the bottom and on the top. So how is this tea processed? Well, first it's picked. It's a bud and leaf. That's the pick. It's a spring pick. These leaves are compared to plantation style leaves in the north. They're larger. After you pick them, you get them back to the processing facility. Once in the processing facility, you have one of two choices. You can either put them on a very long machine that pushes heat through it and has holes on it, and it causes the leaves to jump up and down, and it's a withering machine, or you can wither outdoors on bamboo baskets. So farmers have both mechanisms that they use. Usually when you wither on a machine, you pile them to about 8 inches high, somewhere between 6 and 8 inches high. And usually when you're withering, you're going to wither this type of tea usually for something like 8 to 10 hours, something on that order. That's step 2. You pick is step 1, you wither is step 2. So what are you trying to do when you wither? You're trying to reduce the moisture content. You want the moisture content of the leaf to reduce down to somewhere around 60% or so. Every farmer does it differently. So if you ask me, well, what's the ironclad rule? The answer is there is no ironclad rule. This is craft tea. It's done through years of experience passed on from generation to generation. So after you wither the tea, what do? You roll it. So rolling the tea requires, if you're doing it by hand, for you to actually on a bamboo basket, roll it using a variety of hand motions, being very skilled, unlike me, and creating a shape and also breaking down the cells in the leaves so that the volatile oils, the essential essences get on the outside of the leaf. If you're doing it by hand, generally you're going to do it 40 to 60 minutes. Some farmers a little longer, some a little shorter. Okay, the timer has gone off. Tea master deliberately, not in a hurry, separates the tea leaves from the tea liquor. Remember, in a minute, you're going to be doing this too. So there's no hurry about this. It's better to be right than in a hurry. Okay, so let's take a look at this. When you do it, your color should be something like this. So to me, that's a nice reddish color. The first thing you're going to do, you don't even have to actually put this to your nose, but it's better if you do, because I could smell it over there, is you smell this stuff. And you get your first impressions. Remember, aroma and taste are connected. And since this is 170 degrees, you're always cautious when you put your nose in the glass. But since it's 170 degrees, there's less likelihood of singeing your nasal passage. Okay, so I have a sense of this. Then I look at the tea liquor here, get that nice color. Okay, I get my first impression from actually smelling the tea liquid, which is different than the tea leaves. And you're going to take a 175-degree sip. So what that means is you're going to get enough in carefully to coat your tongue, coat the sides of the tongue, swirl it around a little bit, because remember, this is the definition of entering the quality arena. You'll swallow it, being aware of what aftertaste there is, if any, and then you'll look for the energetics. Now, what do I mean by energetics? You know, a lot of these experts use all these very esoteric terms, you know, like qi and so forth. I'm just a simple tea guy. So I don't use esoteric. I use energetics, and it's specifically to me, how do I feel after I've drunk this? Do I feel grounded? Do I feel comforted? Are my extremities heating up? These are the sensations that we're looking for a report on. All right, so let me take my 175-degree sip. So this is a sip being present. We're not doing anything else. We're thinking about the quality arena. So is it smooth? Is it viscous? Is it thin? Is it light? Is it heavy? Does it cause the tongue to feel dry? Where in the tongue? Does it cause any other part of the mouth to feel dry? Is there a tanginess in this? Is there a hint of sweetness? And then aftertaste. What sort of aftertaste are you getting? And then energetics. So these are the elements you evaluate first. And when you are looking to identify teas that you really like, you need to be able to address these things. Because if you address these things and come in here, yeah, I want smooth, I want heavy, I want a nice, cool aftertaste. Okay, I can get you to places. And I can get you to those places easily. Now, I'm greedy. I want to take a second sip. Okay, for those of you who are new, remember, I'm not going to give away. You have to work at this as well. When you do this, you're going to tell me what the quality arena is like, and then you're going to tell me the flavor profile and the aroma profile. So we've gone through this, and Xiaobei is going to go ahead and brew with you now. And actually, before she steps into the screen, I forgot to give a shout out to two people. I think Terry is on from France this morning. Good morning, or actually good evening, Terry. And there's somebody who from Iowa on today where it's 4 or 5 degrees. I don't envy you, Cindy.
Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour, ça va?
Oui, ça va bien.
Très
So nice to
bien.
see everybody.
Heureuse de te voir. Happy to see you.
Bonsoir, mon ami.
Oui, moi aussi. Who said that? Bonsoir.
Je suis Jeanne.
Good morning.
Hi, everybody.
right.
So
Yes.
sweet to see
So-
everybody.
All of you are getting ready to go ahead and brew the tea. So you're preparing your cup. You're using any temperature water between 175 and 212 to heat your cup. Make sure everything is absolutely clean. And then you're you're not quite there yet, but in a minute. You gotta make sure both cups are well heated. Good, and now you're gonna go ahead and draw the 175-degree water. And so as I said, in a minute, you'll dissipate the steam. And the question comes up sometimes, these are a lot of steps. I thought this was easier. Can't we just, draw the 175 direct and use it? The answer is, of course you could. There's no problem doing that. However, if you want maximal flavor and maximal brightness, you go through all these steps. And that's why we teach you these steps, so that you understand how to do it. Because when people taste the tea here, they always leave with a certain impression. Ah, yeah, this tea is this profile. And sometimes when they buy it and do it at home, wait a minute, this doesn't quite taste like what I got at the tea shop. Well, did you do the steps? That's the first thing. Did you even understand the steps? That's why we go through and explain the steps so it's easy for you to do. All right, so you take your baggie, it's pre-weighed, 5 grams. Pour it in the cup, the preheated cup, and you're going to go ahead and shake that. Dissipate your water one more time. Pour it in the leaves and set your timer for 3 minutes. Okay, so let's see. We withered, and we withered in a room where there's not too high humidity. There's some humidity. Temperatures anywhere from 77 degrees to about 95 degrees, never more than 95. That's a mistake. After we've withered, then we go ahead and roll. We're skilled rolling, and we've got a rhythm. We start out light, we go medium, we go light again, loose, and then no pressure. I mean, they've got this rhythm down, and their hand movements are just brilliant. When I do it, mine ends up all over the floor anyway, and it's a bad job. They throw my stuff away after I leave, but they're skilled, and they keep it on for 40 to 60 minutes. Sometimes if they think they need to do it a little bit more, they'll do it a little bit more. At the conclusion of that, what do? They then pile the tea. So they stack it, and it's different heights, some a foot high, some 13, 14 inches, some 10 inches high, and they put them in piles and let them oxidize, because you've broken down the leaf, right? And as soon as you break down the leaf by rolling like that, what happens? The insides are exposed to the air. And when it's exposed to the air, a chemical reaction happens. So think banana, think apple. You cut a banana or you cut an apple, it's exposed to the air. What happens? There's a change in color and a change in flavor. They become brown, and that's caused by a chemical reaction. The same thing with tea leaves. Yes.
Is this a bud and 2 leaves?
This is a bud and leaf. And after that change in reaction, you are trying as a farmer to heavily oxidize up to about 92, 93%. And so you may be thinking to yourself, oh, he's really using precise numbers. God, these farmers are real scientists. And the answer would be no. The farmers use their nose to tell them when they've got to that stage. By the way, on the way to larger farms, you can smell those farms 2 or 3 miles away. The aroma is so pungent and strong and wonderful. All right, timer is off. You're going to separate the leaves from the liquor.
Are all red teas a 1 bud and 1 leaf pick?
No. So the question is, are all red teas a bud and 1 leaf pick? They're usually not a bud and 1 leaf. They're usually a bud and 2 leaves, a bud and 3 leaves, sometimes even a bud and 4 leaf. But when you're going, these are high mountain. So when you're going for a better pick, and better being a higher, recognized as a higher quality pick, it ends up being usually a bud and a leaf, sometimes a bud and 2 leaves. All right, so now you're going to enter the quality arena with me. And so the first thing you're going to do is smell the leaves carefully. And then you're going to smell the tea liquor. And then you're going to take the quality arena 175-degree sip. And you roll it around in your mouth. And again, you're not looking at first at taste here. You're looking at consistency. You're looking at dryness. You're looking at aftertaste. And then you're thinking about energetics. Those are the key things you're doing in this first taste of this tea. As you go to a second and a third taste, then you're thinking about, okay, is this sweet or is it fruity? Is it chocolatey? What is it? Is then what you try and describe. And again, for those of you who are new today, don't worry about being nervous about descriptions or descriptors. We'll help you and the group will help you through a group description of this. Yes.
The scent of the steeped leaves had hints of chocolate and malt.
Love this description. So the steep leaves, hint of chocolate and malt. There is clearly a hint of that chocolate and especially a hint of that malt. Yes.
Very smooth.
Very smooth indeed. Yes, it is.
get light dryness, the front of the mouth and the roof of the mouth.
Light dryness, front and roof of the mouth. Now, again, for those of you who are new, if you're getting it in a different position in the mouth, it does not matter. We're genomically different. It's nice if you get something in the mouth, but if you get it on the sides instead, that's okay.
Smell of fragrance like flowers.
Fragrance like flowers. I like this description, and I hope it links up with something else that I hope to hear in a minute or two.
I smell fruit in the wet leaves. It's very subtle in the liquor, however.
Good. Now we're starting to dig down. Fruit in the wet leaves. There is no question. In fact, when I first smelt this morning, I'm thinking to myself, holy cow, I forgot that there's so much fruitiness in leaves. There is. But it isn't that same fruitiness in the liquor. And instead, we're getting some other things, including hints of floral.
Somebody gets a dry fruit smell in the leaves and somebody else is getting hints of citrus.
So a dried fruit is one commentator's hint of the aroma in the leaves, and a hint of citrus is another commentator's. And these are all within bounds. Good comments.
I thought at first that what I was smelling was actually a hint of oolong flavor or sense to it, but I get the dried fruit comment.
Okay, so remembering, you notice that I don't rush to judgment when I'm smelling stuff. And I don't rush to judgment when I'm tasting it, because initial hints, you can temper those as you go back. You notice I always go back and try and get to solidify what it is I think I'm detecting, because first impressions sometimes aren't where you end up.
I get a sweetness in the scent.
Great, a sweetness in the scent. There clearly is a sweetness in the scent.
Incredibly smooth. It almost floats in my mouth.
Incredibly smooth, floats in this commentator's mouth. This is incredibly smooth. And that smoothness should tell you something about the tea itself. So remember, I already gave you clues in the beginning. This is old to ancient bush. The more aged, and one other thing that I said as a clue, you recall I said it's high mountain. And we're going to need to talk about this a little bit further down in this session, because there is something that's now being proven scientifically to back up the sensibility that we've been talking about in terms of high mountain and ancient and old tree tea. All right, love all this commentary. The one thing that I would have hooked up the floral with, to me, now if you all don't get this, that's not an issue, because again, we're all genomically different. So this isn't a right or a wrong. I would augment the floral with almost a honeyness to this. And another commentator had said sweetness. And again, I would link that up to a honeyness in this.
There's a richness in the flavor. The malt comes through. The sweetness is there. Other things that are a little more elusive.
Richness in the flavor, maltiness, and other elusive things. This is an unusual red because there is more complexity. Again, so many of our reds they're more single flavor. This is not single flavor. It's single quality. The quality is outstanding from the beginning. Smooth, mellow, rich, all of that in the quality without question. And For those of you who are not used to having a red tea like this, what's surprising to most people is A, the color doesn't seem dark enough for this richness, and B, the richness surprises people because they equate it with color. So you have to pull those two things apart. Yeah.
For energetics, I get a happy belly feeling, like my microbiome is dancing.
This commentator has a dancing microbiome. Love that comment. Happy digestive feeling. Yes.
Somebody else finds it to be very warming.
Yes, extremely warming. That I definitely concur with. I usually start these sessions with cooler hands. My hands tend to be a little cool, but as soon as I have teas like this, they start to heat up and I can physically feel it both in my feet and in my hands.
Several more votes for smoothness, and somebody else adds it reminds them of the honeysuckle flowers from her childhood.
Oh, you know, I love this comment. I love both comments. The comments about smoothness, yeah, this is this, it's so smooth. It's like sitting beside a lake where there's no ripples at all on the surface. Is blue as all get out. The sky is blue. It's just that wonderful sense of just smooth, and the flavor is smooth. And then the other commentators comment, I actually like your comment better than mine because I talked about honey, but you dug down. You talked about honeysuckle, and I had honeysuckle in my childhood, so that makes perfect sense. It's a great comment. All right, excellent, excellent job of evaluating this. Let's finish up the processing, and then I want to talk about a few other elements related to the quality of this. So in terms of processing, I left you all in this room. It's the humidity is controlled. They piled the tea. Every so often, the farmer is digging his hand in the tea and smelling it and looking at it. And they're using their nose, by and large, to determine when it's going to be done. At the conclusion of doneness, and doneness doesn't have a time. Again, I remind you all, this is like grandma's recipes. They're just the framework. They don't tell you in the scientific way that you and I went to school and like to hear 8.5 minutes and not a second more. That's not how this works. This is artisanal. It's crafted. So the farmer can actually pile this for anywhere from 4 to 8 hours. And that's their choice. And it's their choice by experience. It's their choice by weather. And it's their choice by the actual varietal and the way it came in this particular year. All of these elements go into this tea. Now, when they have oxidized it to the degree that they want, are they all done? The answer is no. They have more work to do. And it depends on what style they're going to end up finishing. So, and I'll explain that in a minute. So the next step that every single farmer will take is to refire. Oh, wrong. Is to fire the tea, not refire. It is to bake the tea. That's the actual correct terminology. And why do you bake the tea? You're trying to reduce the moisture content. You're trying to stabilize the essences which are on the outside of the leaf. Remember, they've been broken up because they've been rolled and they've been sitting there sweating, oxidizing, sorry. And then you bake it, and all that great flavor and volatile compounds You bake them on to the outside of the leaf, and at the same time, you reduce the moisture content. The moisture content better be 6% or less. If it's more, and you're selling to us, you will create an enormous headache for us, because Chinese customs is not a very humorous place to be, especially when you try and take tea through that has more than 6% water content. They will send back the entire lot of tea, even if it's only a small batch that is not at the 6% or less level, because from a reputational standpoint, they don't want the tea to go to some place and the tea buyer to say, hey, this molded, this doesn't taste good, this doesn't taste fresh. And if you leave it up there at 8, 9%, it will mold after X amount of time. So that's why it's a requirement to get it down to 6 or less percent. So farmer is doing that. Now, at the conclusion of baking and making sure it's down to that less than 6%, the farmer has one more important choice. And in this particular farm, they made a choice to do a little bit more processing. Most farms in this region wouldn't do that. Most farms in this region would cap it off here, sort. Why are you sorting? You're sorting to get rid of any things that slipped in there that shouldn't be in there. So if there are any bugs, be dead bugs at that time, or rocks or anything that doesn't belong in there, you get that out. And then you package. But for this particular farmer, he went through what they call Yunnan Kung Fu process. It's the same Kung Fu as in the fighting, but it doesn't mean the same thing. This means master processor, or master processing would be the best way to translate this. Skilled, refined processing. And so they then refire. Here's where the refire comes in. They rebake and reshape to get it just exactly to the way they want it. And it's usually this 2, 3, or 4 more steps, which from a marketing standpoint and a market standpoint distinguishes this in terms of pricing. Because when you get to these extra steps, the tea itself tastes smoother, the leaves are more uniform. It's really interesting, and they can charge X% more. And by the way, let's talk about this high mountain tea versus low mountain tea. And let's make some things clear, because now there's some real science associated with this, which 3 or 4 years ago there wasn't. There's always been the saying that, well, tea grown next to the clouds is better. And usually on the market in China, it goes for 200 or 300 times, 200 or 300%. So that would be 2 or 3 times what a lower mountain tea would go for. Everybody acknowledges, yeah, this is better quality, but people buying it don't always understand, well, what makes it better quality? Can you describe? Well, scientists published a paper last year which talked about this exact thing. They analyzed at a high mountain elevation. So now you're going to ask me something specific, and I'm going to answer something specific. So 3,000 feet or above, and usually you're not talking about terraced. Usually you're talking about old or ancient. Terraced is usually under 3,000, not always, but usually. So at those higher elevations, let's think a moment. Is the sunlight, annual sunlight, the same at the high elevation versus the low elevation? The answer would be no. it's on average in the areas where they studied anywhere from 400 to 550 hours less annually. That's a big number. So that's one element. And we'll talk about why that's important in a second. Second thing, is it colder or hotter at higher elevations? Well, unless you have a volcano at the top of the mountain, it's colder. And colder means that the growth of the leaves is slower. And that also changes the flavor profile. And again, I'm going to talk about exactly how that changes the flavor profile. The last element is, let's see, old and ancient, which means tea trees. Do tea trees need a lot of supervision? Do you have to water them a lot? Oh, maybe trees. Trees. Do we use fertilizer on trees here? Well, the answer is of course not. So the chemical elements in these areas, the chemicals in the soil, the artificial chemicals in the soil are way less. In some areas, virtually non-existent. These all add to the quality of the tea leaves. So let's go through one by one and explain why. So when it's colder during the winter and the growth is slower, by the way, is coldness a stressor or an enhancer? It's a stressor. And what it does is it creates more amino acids within the leaves. And it increases, now we're in the science section, by the way. And in the science section, for those of you who are new, I have no self-control. I use large words when I'm not supposed to, so just bear with me. So the soluble amino acids, and this is important, create more sweetness, more natural sweetness. And it's created because it's stressed by being cold, and it's growing more slowly. And so, wait a minute, let's think about this. More of something probably means less of something else. So what am I giving up? You're giving up tea polyphenols. So what is it about tea polyphenols that creates a different flavor profile? Tea polyphenols, which on the surface, let's not use that term, which inherently, that's a better term, are going to aim towards more astringent and more bitter. And why is that? Which polyphenols am I talking about? I'm talking about catechins. So catechins, again, for those of you who are new, you see them in the newspaper and the magazines all the time. Those are the green tea polyphenols, supposed to be helpful for heart health, supposed to be helpful as anti-inflammatory, helpful potentially as anti-tumor. So you have less of these, more of the amino acids, so it produces a better flavor. Now, in terms of the fewer hours of sunlight, that also produces more amino acids. And those amino acids tend to, they're not all soluble, by the way. Some are insoluble, and there's a difference, because when you get the soluble ones, the more of those you have, the more hints of sweetness you're going to have in the end result. If they're insoluble, then the hints of sweetness are very, very hard to detect. All right, so those are the two things. I don't think I have to explain. Fewer chemicals, especially poisonous chemicals in the soil, is a good thing. Yes.
When you're ready, I have a question about the brewing process.
Okay, go ahead.
When I strained my tea after the brewing time, I wound up with a thin layer of tiny bubbles, almost like a foam on the top of the tea. Should I avoid this result? If so, how? Did I strain the tea too fast?
So the questioner said that they ended up with a set of bubbles after they strained the tea into the cup. And I don't, let's see, I don't want to be critical because there's nothing, you still got a great tasting cup of tea. And when we strain, we do try and have a uniform pour, and we try and pour around the cup. It's a subtle motion. We're trying to create fewer bubbles. The bubbles you created are not going to make the second cup taste poor or poorly. So don't worry about it. But the way we avoid it is that rotational pour and more of an even slow pour as we're getting the tea out of the, separated from the tea leaves.
So
Yes,
it's more about aesthetics.
it's more about aesthetics. Yes.
And then one more comment that came in while you flavor while you were speaking was once it sat in this participant's mouth, the tea, she thought it was a little bitter, and then that changed into this velvet feeling and a caramel taste.
Bitter velvet and caramel was this participant's journey. Love the journey. And I love the fact you stuck with it, because when we drink unconsciously, what does that mean? Maybe during a course of 10 minutes with tea, we tune in for 1 minute total. A few seconds here, a few seconds there. And when we tune in, we catch a slice of this whole continuum. And then we take that slice and call the tea that slice. Quality Arena demands, when you're first trying a tea, that you get the whole continuum, which this participant did. And I love the fact that you got all the way to the caramel. I get that caramel too. And by the way, I sense that right away in the wet leaves. For me, that's a strong, I get a strong sense of that.
As the tea cools, I taste and smell almost like heated banana leaves.
Oh, I love this. As the tea cools, taste and smell heated banana leaves. I get that. I get that. That's a nice, that puts a nice picture in my head. All right, let's see how I'm doing. Oh, I'm doing real good. I haven't overtalked yet. I still have 1 more minute to overtalk.
Oh, wait, one more little bit of mineral in the tea. In the last bit of the first brew, a little minerality finally. I think that's the first time anybody's mentioned minerality.
That is interesting, a little minerality. And by minerality here, I have to ask a clarifying question. Is this minerality, in what sense is it? Is it more of a little earthiness, or is it real minerality? So for me, I don't necessarily detect so much minerality as I do detect a little earthiness. But we probably are talking about the exact same thing using a different vocabulary.
Minerality from soil is the fall.
Okay, great. Yeah, minerality from the soil. That's perfect. That's perfect. All right. So a couple more things I want to mention about this tea. I said in the beginning, it is certified organic, which is true. It's not very often farmers go to the expense to do that. But this particular farmer felt it was really important to do that. The other thing is, when you're thinking about this particular tea, it's really important, and some of you captured this, to remember that because of the complexity of this, you have to keep drinking all the way to the bottom before you get a final summary of what's going on with this tea. Again, this tea doesn't have the start and then an ending place right away, as some of the reds do. I'm going to answer one more question that was asked a few weeks ago, and this is the question of color. You notice that this is a redder color. So remembering what goes into color again. So theaflavins, which is what catechins change into when they're oxidized, one of the elements, and then theorubicins. And so it's always a proportion, the proportion of theaflavins to theorubicins. Theaflavins tend to be yellowish, theorubicins tend to be reddish. There's one other set of ratios that's important in determining color here. And now we come to my favorite part of the presentation, because I get to use a huge old long word that if you can get this on a Scrabble board, you should get 10 times the normal number of points. So it's called pheophytins. So pheophytins over theorubicins. So again, rubicins being that reddish color, pheophytins being a blackish hue. So if the ratio is higher, the color is going to be darker. So you can tell, compared to crimson needle or some of the other reds we've had, this does have a darkish hue to it. That's the pheophytins. As a reminder, because all of you are now rushing to your dictionary and thinking, where do those pheophytins come from? That's degraded chlorophyll. So as the chlorophyll degrades, it degrades into two or more substances. The main one is pheophytins, and then there's a pheophorbite. The pheophytins is what lends that black color to this. Good. I got through every single thing that I wanted to bring up today. I love this team, and I love the fact that we could spend the time going through this with you today. Yes.
One more question for you. What happens if I reheat my tea?
So I'm not sure I understand this question. Reheat the actual finished tea
finished-
liquor?
Yeah, exactly. It's cooled down. I'd like to reheat it.
So it depends on what you're really thinking of doing. If you're thinking of putting it in the microwave, that's an issue, because you will disturb the elements within the tea. It will flatten the flavor. The way that occasionally, particularly if I have guests and they've come late and I was going to start out with this, there is a way to handle this which is marginally okay. And that is to actually have a pot of boiled water that's about half the size, half the height of the cup, and then put the cup in it. Not while it's boiling, by the way. It's off the burner, and you put the cup in it and heat it up that way. That's okay. You will not have the flattening effect that you would if you put it in the microwave. Yes.
Can you please send the article on the high and low amount of tea?
Yes, I can do that.
Great. After I finish in cup, I feel very relaxed and laid back.
The commentator says, after finishing the cup, relaxed and laid back. And that's really a key element about energetics. And I'm really glad that we're finishing in this spot, because energetics lasts with you a long time. Sometimes when you're in the quality arena, the first blush of energetics is hard to determine, but certainly by the end of the cup of tea, the energetics become more important. And remember, if some of you aren't feeling it, don't worry about that. There's nothing wrong with you. What it is, again, is being present, and then secondly, getting used to the idea of thinking about this. The other thing is, because we are different, some of us will receive the energy differently. No errors in that, no critique in that. All right, great spending the time with you. Xiaobei and I and Lise always have wonderful time with all of you. Next week, we're going to do peacock's tongue. And by next week, I will have listed what future sessions are going to look like. And I'll also have more clarity about what we're going to do in terms of traveling this year. We are intending to travel. We don't know how far away. We don't know the dates yet. We're working on all of that right now. And since we just learned this morning that the Japanese crop is not being picked currently, this is dampening our enthusiasm for Japan. So we'll see. We should be able to let you know next week what to expect. As usual, have a safe week. Have a great tea drinking week. We'll see you next week. You all take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye all.